fact that we can think about how we think, the fact that we can observe how we're acting, the fact that we can pay attention to how we're feeling means we could modify ourselves to do a better job in life. That's called metacognition. So when a person begins to wake up to who they're being, and then they say, like Gandalf on the bridge in Lord of the Rings, "You may not pass today." That kind of decision becomes an experience for the person that they never forget. That kind of willingness to change is when they transmute those survival emotions into elevated emotions. And those emotions, because they're addictive and emotions are the record of the past, then for the most part, the body as the unconscious mind does not know the difference between an experience in your life that creates an emotion and an emotion that you can fabricate by thought alone. To the body, it's the same. So a person who's living in anger every day or sadness in every day, their body as their unconscious mind is believing it's in the same past conditions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The body's in the past. So when a person takes that emotion and literally denatures it and turns it into another emotion, the freedom from that addiction, breaking the chains from that emotional addiction, is called self-love, is called joy. Now there's a liberation of energy. And the person is in love with themselves, they're in love with their life, and they say, that was so worth it. And all of a sudden, they look back at their past and they say, I would never change anything in my past because it brought me to this present moment. And when you can look back at your past that way, then the past rolls up to the present moment, and now you're beginning to experience true freedom. That certain people will not see possibility until they reach crisis, till they reach their lowest level, and then they're going to wake up and say, I better change. I think the greatest demonstration of change really is to begin to show others how to do it, to be the living example of it. That when you and I are the living example of joy, that when we are not attached to what people think or emotions that keep us feeling sick, and we are celebrating life, and we are passionate about our future, that we are filled with ideas and inspiration. That's a very contagious state of being. And people that are lost in habits or lost in those emotional states, they will see it initially as a affront. It'll be a confronting moment for them. But inside them, they secretly want to be free. They just don't know how to do it. So we always say in our workshops, you always know when someone's in the midst of change because they stop talking about it. They don't talk about it. They're too busy being it. So if you and I are waking up every morning and demonstrating change in our life, the people in our life have one of two choices. They either begin to become inspired by change for themselves, not because you're preaching to them philosophically, but because you're demonstrating it in your life. They'll either rise up to that, or the person cannot maintain a relationship with the person who's living in such freedom, which means they'll probably stay the same for the rest of their life. But if crisis happens, they may make another choice. So my recommendation for people who are steeped in habits and emotional states and patterns of thought, the individuals around them have to live in a state of joy. They have to live in a state of freedom. They have to demonstrate it in every single area of their life. And normally, there's a thing in physics called entrainment, which means sooner or later, others start to vibrate at the same rate as you. So be the example, and don't drop to their level of suffering, because if a person is suffering or a person is stuck in a pattern, they're using people in conditions in their life to reaffirm that addiction to suffering, to that addiction to guilt, that addiction to difficulty. But if they're no longer using you for that addiction because you're overjoyed, they have a choice now. They can surrender that, and that's the greatest thing you can do for them, is to no longer meet them on that level, but begin to influence them to rise up, not by what you say, but who you are. You have one of two choices. Now listen, nothing wrong with feeling frustrated, nothing wrong with feeling sad. Emotions are not bad. They're the end product of past experiences. And we can remember experiences better because we can remember how we feel. But when you have a reaction to someone or something in your life, there's a refractory period of chemicals that are created. There is an alteration in your chemistry. And if you don't know how to control that refractory period, and you allow it to linger for hours or days, that's called a mood. A mood is one long emotional reaction. If you keep that refractory period going for weeks or months, that's called a temperament. So I say, why are you so frustrated? Well, I lost everything 6 months ago, and I'm living by the same emotional reaction. If you keep that emotional reaction going for years on end, that's called a personality trait. So most people's personalities are defined by the emotions that they memorized. And so you would say, why are you so frustrated? Well, I'm frustrated because I lost everything 9 months ago, or 2 years ago, or 5 years ago. Now, purely from an objective standpoint, what that means is I was altered in some way because I lost everything, and I haven't been able to change for the last 2 years. As a matter of fact, my frustration keeps me connected to my past. Now, shortening the refractory period of your emotional reaction is emotional intelligence. A great thing to teach children. But if a person's going to live in frustration and that is their identity, and then they're going to tell the story of how they lost everything within that emotion, then they're firing and wiring the same circuits in their brain and emotionally conditioning their body to more frustration. And their identity now is connected to the past. Now, they will never create a new future holding on to those emotions of the past. Now, I have had many, many challenges in my life that have left very strong emotions. I understand them, I'm human. But at what point do you realize that living by frustration is, number one, not loving to you? Because those chemicals push the genetic buttons that will ultimately create a disease, number one. And number two, frustration is causing you to view your life through the lens of frustration, so you're going to look for more things in your life to reaffirm your addiction to frustration. And then you're going to hang out with people that complain and are frustrated too, and you're going to use each other to reaffirm your addiction, and that's called a culture. So then there comes a moment where a person finally says enough, and they say, no more. And they begin to look at how they think. They begin to pay attention to how they're feeling. They begin to become conscious of how they're behaving when they're in that state. And if you're observing those states of mind and body, it means you're no longer the automatic program. You're the consciousness now observing the program, and that's when you begin to objectify your subjective self. You're the observer of the self, which means you're no longer the addiction or the biology, the program that you're rooted in. Every great person in history knew this. We go to movies to watch people overcome insurmountable odds because we secretly believe in our own greatness. So whether I'm talking to a CEO of a company, or to a prison inmate, or the janitor that's sweeping the floor in a school, everybody secretly believes in their own greatness. And when you realize that that frustration is keeping you anchored to the past, and you realize that there's a whole lot of future for you to create, when you can really reason that in your mind, you'll say, what is this frustration worth to me? And when you begin to break free of it, you will be liberated and new opportunities will come into your life. So again, study the knowledge that shows you that there are future possibilities. Nelson Mandela, he had a whole lot of reasons to hate. He had a whole lot of reasons to be frustrated. Had a whole lot of reasons to be judgmental. 27 years in prison, sooner or later he realized, I got to be creative. You know, first 10 years of his life, he said, I'm never going to get out of here. I'm never going to get out of here. I'm never going to get out of here. And he was creating the emotions of hatred and anger. He's looking outside his prison after 10 years. And he said his heart spoke to him. And all of a sudden, it said, maybe you could get out of here. What if you could get out of here? And he started thinking, how could I get out of here? How could I get out of here? Ask the frontal lobe question. And all of a sudden, the frontal lobe begins to select different networks of neurons and seamlessly piece them together to create a new idea. And he says, I'm going to write letters to the United States on apartheid and anti-apartheid. So every week he writes letters and he sends them to the United States. A few years later, the United States starts answering. And then he says, wow, who's going to lead this nation? Who's going to lead this nation? Who's going to lead this nation? And then all of a sudden he started thinking, maybe I could lead this nation. Maybe I'm the guy that should lead this nation. And as he starts to ask this question, the most important question comes out. How would I have to be to lead a nation? Now this is greatness. And he transmuted his hatred into kindness. He took his judgment and turned it into compassion. He took his bitterness and turned it into unlimited mind. He walks out of that prison 27 years